Without further ado, would you please welcome Dr. Rizkallah back for Conversation Part 2.
Well, thank you for having me back. As Michael described, what we're talking about today is really the second part of a long conversation, okay? If you have not seen the scientific component of this conversation, you need to. And if you're online watching this and you haven't seen that, just stop right where you are and go back to the first one, because what we're talking about really is my journey. And my journey started there, and it only made sense to start there with the fundamental question: is there a God? You wouldn't get to the next question of who is God unless you answered the fundamental question. And it actually is such a strong springboard, it springs you into the second question. So let's just take a moment to revisit some of the topics from last time. I told you I am a healthy skeptic. We talked about the concept of atheism. We explored the history of the question, is God dead? Which there was a point in time when we thought science has proved God. And then we actually absorbed more science as a culture, and we realized actually science is pointing to God, so much so that books are written about it like this: is atheism dead? And we answered that question last time. It's right where we left off. And I said, atheism's dead. And I asked, what killed it? And what was the answer? Science killed it. And at that last talk, I showed you the science, which I've surrounded this book with, all the different topics that we covered last time on how science killed atheism. One of the topics actually is also a springboard here and is going to give us some structure. We talked about this PhD atheist in physics, PhD in physics, and we talked about the fact that he said, the apparent logical necessity of first cause is a real issue for any universe that has a beginning. Therefore, on the basis of logic alone, one cannot rule out such a deistic view of nature. He's an atheist. And he said, there is a logical necessity of first cause, because our universe, as I showed last time, had a beginning. Logical necessity. He went on. But even in this case, it is vital to realize that this deity bears no logical connection to the personal deities of the world's great religions, in spite of the fact that it is often used to justify them. And he went on. A deist, meaning God believer, who is compelled to search for some overarching intelligence to establish order in nature, will not, in general, be driven to the personal gods, the God of the scriptures, by the same logic. And that's our springboard. I said I totally agree with him. It's not the same logic. In fact, the journey we took last time used a logic called science, scientific method, scientific logic, and we proved, through logical deduction, not evidence for, proved, there must be a God, okay? But today we're not using the same logic, right? He gave us structure. We're going to use a different logic. So we're going to scratch out scientific. We're going to put in historical. That's a different logic. It's a different fact set. And so we're going to go on this journey together. This is my journey, the historical journey of a healthy skeptic. Now, as last time, I want to tell you, I'm not here to persuade you. This is my journey. This is how I found Jesus Christ, to answer the question of who is God. You may not be a healthy skeptic. You may be a skeptic to such a level that there's nothing that would convince you. That's okay. Not here to persuade everyone. I'm just here to share with you how I got there. We need to take a moment to figure out what we can accomplish tonight, okay? Last time, I said we proved there is a God. Why? How can we do that? Because science can do that. But history can't prove anything. It's true. History can't prove anything. History can be faked. You can't test history today. You can test science today, but you can't test history today. So it gives us some structure, whereas the first talk we proved something. Here we can't prove anything, but what we do in historical analysis and even in the justice system is we have levels of proof. Let me give you some of them. Okay? This is a level of proof pyramid. At the very top is that pinnacle, unattainable concept, proof in gold. Okay? Lower than that, at the bottom, we have preponderance of the evidence, starts with a P. Clear and convincing evidence is the next level of proof. It's a higher level, starts with a C. The highest level that we actually go for in the justice system or in history is beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's still doubt. But we're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? PCB, that's actually what this is. This is a PCB pyramid. Now, let's gain some knowledge here on how to evaluate things. How do historians separate fact from myth? They use this thing called the historical method. You may have heard the scientific method. You may not have heard of the term, the historical method, but it's a method. What does it use? They cross-reference primary sources like diaries and official records. They use diaries. They use personal diaries in history, in historical method. They use that. This is relevant because some of the things we're going to be looking at are diaries, actually, of people's experiences. They analyze material evidence, like artifacts, and they look for physical or narrative corroboration across multiple independent accounts. Why? Because if this person is saying this and this person is saying the same thing, they co-validate. Okay? If they're saying different things, they invalidate. So when you see multiple things, 1, 2, 3, 4 things, starting to co-validate, 5 things, the more co-validate, the more valid the historians call it. At the bottom, there are tools. Source criticism. Historians evaluate accounts, meaning historical accounts or testimonies, historical testimonies, for bias, exaggeration, or political motives. We're going to do that too. And then there's this interesting thing, archaeological corroboration. Through historical methods, experts frequently discuss how the discovery of physical ruins help validate or contextualize ancient myths. And we're going to do that too. So, we're going to be credibility testing history today via a courtroom approach. That's our goal. And we're asking the question, who is God? Here's my thesis. There is no religion as historically supported as Christianity. I believe by the end of tonight, you're going to agree with that. Let's start looking at the history. These are the majority of the religions that exist today on a timeline. 2000 BC, you have Judaism and Hinduism. They're the oldest of the religions. And I'm going to be talking about the ones that are checked there. There are 7 religions checked there. I'll be talking about those. Basically, you can take all of the religions of today and you can divide them into 3 categories. Okay? The first category is the religions where there are millions of gods or there's no God claim at all. In those instances, what you have is you get to just pick a god, any god you want, or don't. Okay? The second group is a religion that's based on a private encounter or miracle, okay, where a person heard something or felt something or saw a miracle, but it's one person. Okay? There's no public miracles. Okay? And in that case, that person told others who God is. Okay? And the third one, the third group is public miracles. Okay? And in this instance, multiple people told other people who God is and what they saw. Let's put some labels on this. In the first one, there's no claim to test because they're saying, pick whatever you want. The religion's not taking a position. There may be no God, there may be many gods. We're not taking a position. That's the religion. Okay? So there's nothing for us to test historically there. Okay? In the second one, the claim is not testable. How do I test what's in someone's brain? Historically, I can't do that. It's not testable. In the third one, the claims are testable, and now if we add more labels to this, what you're going to find is that the first group is Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. What you're going to find the second group is Islam, and the third group is Judaism and Christianity. Let's go through some fact-finding. How many gods are in Hinduism? 330 million or more? Just pick one. It's all fine. Does Buddhism have a god? No. Buddhism is considered a non-theistic religion. That's kind of weird, right? It's a religion that has no god. Non-theistic religion. And in fact, Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism are all the same. It's a non-theistic religion, meaning it does not believe in a creator God or a personal deity. Okay, let's look at that second group. Okay, Muhammad is the prophet behind Islam, right? In 609 AD, he claims to have alone, by himself, received messages that he wrote and called it a book called Quran. And he received this from God. You may not know this, but the Quran says Muhammad did no miracles. Did you know that? Interesting. So without miracles, why would we believe his words? He's just saying, this is what God told me. No miracles. Huh, okay. And if you don't believe me that the Quran said he did no miracles, we can fact find. Does the Quran say Muhammad will do no miracles? Yes, the Quran strongly emphasizes Muhammad did not perform physical or supernatural miracles. And then it cites all the different chapters and verses. Chapters in the book of Quran are called surahs. So Surah 1759 is quoted there, and they say, why are not signs sent down to him from his Lord? The answer, the signs are only with Allah, and I am only a clear warner. He's saying, I am only. He's speaking about himself. I am only a clear warner. There's no miracles, okay? Let's go reevaluate. Okay, so Hinduism and Buddhism, I can't test that historically. There is no test, right? Because they're not making a claim. Islam, I can't test that because it's only in his head. He did no miracles. Okay, they're all gone. Remember my thesis? There is no religion as historically supported as Christianity. I have eliminated 6 of them. 5 on this, but we're leaving Judaism and Christianity, we're putting them together. Okay. So looking at this third group, let's look at this one. Jesus Christ. This guy supposedly did 37 public miracles and allegedly rises after crucifixion. Do you believe it? I find it hard to believe. Let's look at his words. John 14:11 actually quotes Jesus, allegedly. It says Jesus said this. He says, believe me when I say, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe in the evidence of the works themselves. And he's talking about his miracles. What's he saying? He's saying, you can believe me on the things I haven't shown you, but at least believe me on the things I showed you, right? That's very different than Muhammad. Muhammad is saying, just believe me. I didn't show you anything. See? So, do you believe him? If you're a skeptic like me, you wouldn't. You'd have to go through a whole process to get there, but I did get there. Last time, I showed you the Mouhab Rizkallah belief equation, and I said this is the most rudimentary equation. It's so basic. But basically, I said, if you break down the word belief, when you say I believe something, if you break down the word belief into its components, you will find that it's 2 components. It's knowledge and faith. Knowledge defined as things seen, faith defined as things not seen. Okay? Now, if you don't like my equation, I would say back up to what Jesus just said. He said, believe me, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. And if you don't believe that, at least believe in the evidence of my works. He's giving you 2 categories. See, my equation is actually very fundamental. It's at least 2,000 years old. And I said to you last time, and I'll say it again, I don't really consider myself a faith-oriented person, okay? I live in the knowledge world. My belief system is really knowledge. I have such little faith in anything. I will tell you that in my process of finding Jesus Christ to be God, I do have a faith step. It's tiny. It's the size of a mustard seed. And I'll tell you it at the end. But I live in the knowledge side. What is knowledge, right? It's scientific facts, historical facts, and inferences. And what is faith? It's defined in the Bible at Hebrews 11:1 as hope in things not seen. It's defined that way because that's actually what it is. If you look at any dictionary, that's what it's going to say, okay? So here's the question I dealt with. And I was asked as a child and as a young adult, do you believe in Christ? And I used to say, isn't he just a myth? And now I say his history is compelling. And so why the change? I gained knowledge. That's my belief equation. I'm in the knowledge world, okay? Knowledge of what? Historical method fact-finding, historical science inferences, and credibility testing in a courtroom fashion. And so that's where we're about to go. We're going to be testing the history of Christ using a courtroom approach. In this picture, you're familiar with these players, right? You know who the witnesses are. You know what a witness is. You know who the jury is. And in this case, today, you're the jury. We're all the jury, okay? Let's get some basics sort of under our belts, okay? Witnesses. There are different kinds of witnesses, okay? There are disinterested witnesses. Who are those people? Those are like reporters, investigators, investigative journalists. Then there's direct witnesses. The direct witnesses are the people who are in the mix, watching it all happen, okay? And they're going to be testifying to what they saw. And then there is this thing called a hostile witness. This is a very interesting thing, and I'm going to take a moment to explain this, okay? Characterize it, okay? Let's say you're the jury, okay? And Jimmy kills Sally, allegedly, and the jury has to evaluate if that actually happened, okay? And in comes a witness, it's Jimmy's mom, okay? I heard that. Somebody you're not believing it, right? Jimmy's mom came in. Jimmy's mom gets on the stand, and she says, I swear on it, okay? And she goes, Jimmy didn't do it. He was with me. And she gives him an alibi. He couldn't have done it. Do you believe her? Okay. Of course you don't. There's a conflict of interest. Let's change the scenario, okay? Jimmy's mom comes in, swears to tell the truth. She starts crying, and she says, Jimmy did it. I saw him. Boom. Mic drop. Jimmy's going to jail. Everybody knows this, right? Why? Because the conflict she would have to say this is what a hostile witness would experience, okay? So if you have a hostile witness, just one, it's a powerful thing. Let's start going through some of the facts as a jury. What allegedly occurred? Okay, so allegedly, at around the age of 30 years old, this guy starts doing some really interesting things like walking on water. He starts raising people from the dead. This guy, Lazarus, got raised from the dead after 4 days of being dead, allegedly. He feeds 4,000 and 5,000 people in two different instances with some loaves and some fishes, not many. That's how the story goes. And in fact, there are 37 alleged miracles of this Jesus guy. Do you believe it? Hard to believe. Then, the night before he is killed, he has dinner with his followers. They call disciples. And he says to them, tomorrow, they're going to crucify me. And in 3 days, I'll be back. Sure. And he says to them, he says to Peter, one of them, he says, you're going to deny me 3 times in the next 24 hours? Peter's like, no, I won't. Okay. And in fact, the next day, he's severely flogged by the Roman guard. He is crucified and killed. And then the story goes, just as he dies, there's a gigantic earthquake, and the sky goes dark. Do you believe it? Hard to believe. When and where did this happen? Well, this is an interesting question, because the when is weird, because the when technically was in the years of Caesar Augustus, because at the time, timelines were measured by the emperors of Rome. So this guy apparently reset the timeline of history to his birthday. Okay, so when did it happen? It depends on who you're asking. Okay, so he set his timeline to be 0, matching the 27th year of Caesar Augustus. So that the 27th year of Caesar Augustus, everything before that became before Christ, and everything after that became Anno Domini, AD, year of our Lord. And in fact, everyone's birthday, regardless of their religion today, everyone's birthday is set to his birthday. When you tell them what date, 2026, Anno Domini. Where did it happen? It happened around the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Roman Empire under Caesar Augustus, who was the emperor at the time. And in this one corner area called Judea, this guy gets crucified in 33 AD under Caesar Tiberius, different emperor, okay? Let's fast forward a little bit. What else happened here? 49 AD, a new Caesar, Caesar Claudius, who's the emperor at the time, bans Christians from the city of Rome, okay? Bans them. They're hated. Bans them from the city of Rome. Keep going, fast forward. 250 AD, a new emperor, Caesar Decius, 250 AD, criminalizes Christianity, not just the city of Rome. It's Rome Empire wide. Okay. Then something weird happens. Caesar Constantine, who's the emperor in 313 AD, he decriminalizes Christianity using the Edict of Milan, and he becomes a Christian. And on the screen right now is all that purple is the Christianized areas of Rome. So the history is Rome crucified Jesus Christ, and then Jesus Christ transforms Rome. This is the history. Okay, so let's get into some interesting things. Who are the witnesses? Are there disinterested witnesses? You bet there are. There are 9 secular historians writing about this topic. Let's look at the first one. This is Thallus. He's a 1st century historian, writing in 52 AD. And what's he write? On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun. Oh, so maybe there was an earthquake. Maybe. Or maybe this guy's hallucinating. So maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe the guy's hallucinating. That's kind of where my mind goes. Okay, let's keep going. So if you look it up, to start fact-checking, day of crucifixion, earthquake. Geologists, including those cited by NBC News, discovered sediment layers near the Dead Sea showing seismic activity between 26 and 36 AD, with a strong candidate date being Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. Huh. How'd they get that specific? Oh, they tell you. Specific date at the bottom. Combining geologic data with historical astronomical calculations, researchers pinpointed Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. So what did they do? This earthquake, people were writing about this earthquake. And when they were writing about this earthquake, they were also looking up at the stars and connecting star signs with the earthquake. And these geologists can go back using that data and cross-reference it to that date. That's what happened. Okay. Let's click on NBC News. Okay. Quake reveals day of Jesus' crucifixion, researchers believe, and it gives you the citation. What's the citation? International Geology Review, pages 1219 to 1228. Click on it to view the study. Maybe Thallus was not hallucinating. It's probably just a coincidence, right? Yeah, it's got to be. Let's talk about Phlegon. Phlegon, 1st century historian. And with regard to the eclipse in the time of Tiberius Caesar, in whose reign Jesus appeared to have been crucified, and the great earthquakes which then took place, okay, he also says, Jesus, while alive, was of no assistance to himself, but that he arose after death and exhibited the marks of his punishment, and showed his hands had been pierced by nails. Huh, okay. Another historian, Flavius Josephus, 1st century historian, wrote Antiquity of the Jews. About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. Pilate had condemned him to a cross. Those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a 3rd day restored to life. This is a secular historian writing this. Pliny the Younger. Who's this guy? 1st century Roman governor. Before he was a Roman governor, he was a Roman senator. Before he was a Roman senator, he was a lawyer. What did he write? They asserted, however, that the sum and substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God. Why is this relevant? You see, skeptics say the Jesus story is a legend that has expanded and grown, and the story has evolved into what it is today. But actually, when you're reading this, what Pliny is telling us is that the story today is the story then. See what's happening there? So it kills the legend evolution theory. It's the story then. Suetonius, first century Roman historian, wrote Life of Claudius and Lives of the 12 Caesars. The Life of Claudius, he writes, because the Jews of Rome caused constant disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, Christ, he, Claudius, Emperor Claudius, expelled them from the city of Rome. I showed that to you earlier on that map, right? This is what Suetonius is saying. Now, this is interesting because this cross-references directly with the book of Acts, which was written by a physician and historian named Luke. What did Luke write? Luke wrote, there he, meaning Paul, because he was writing a biography of Paul, met a Jew named Aquila, a relative of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. What just happened here? Remember what I was telling you about the historical method? When you're cross-referencing these testimonies, these accounts, and they start to match each other, they co-validate. So in fact, the Roman historians are validating what Luke is writing. Tacitus is an important one. He's a first century Roman senator and historian. He wrote Annals. He writes, Nero was one of the emperors. He's emperor after Claudius. Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures. This is important. The most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign, meaning crucifixion, during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. What's he saying, the most exquisite tortures? Why is that so important? Because it tells you what it was to be a Christian in the day. If you were a Christian, this is what he's telling you was happening. And if you were out there talking about your Christianity, if you were talking about Christ, oh, you're in trouble. So here's a question. Is it normal to have 9 first-century historians write about an event? Is that a lot? Is that a little? What is it? Well, let me answer it, okay? Let me answer it with an example. What documentation is there of Boudica that was created during her life? You may not know who Boudica is. Let me tell you who Boudica is. Boudica died 61 AD. She was the iconic Celtic queen who led a massive, terrifying uprising that nearly drove the Roman Empire completely out of Britain. Despite causing massive military panic in Rome, there are no British or contemporary records of her life. Okay? This is 61 AD. This is the same time period. Okay? How we know her. Roman historian Tacitus, born 56 AD, and Cassius Dio, born 155 AD, both writing long after her rebellion collapsed. That's how we keep history, okay, is with these guys, okay? Now, you may look at those dates and say, how are they writing so far after? There's a reason. There's a reason why they're writing so far after. How were Roman records created and protected in the first century? This is the answer. The Romans did not use paper. They wrote on papyrus, thin wooden leaves, or wax tablets. The things that were protected were really at the government level. Really, they were highly protected or they were overwritten. Let's keep reading. In the more humid Mediterranean climate of Israel, papyrus and wood completely rotted away within a few generations. Records were routinely destroyed or overwritten once they were no longer legally relevant because the material was expensive. Did historians like Tacitus base their historical accounts on documents that predated them? They did, because they needed to keep the record going. Okay? Yes, Tacitus relied heavily on pre-existing documents, And then it ends with, as a high-ranking Roman senator and governor, Tacitus had unique, privileged access to elite imperial records. And that's what these historians had. Imagine Constantine, as the emperor, was convinced of Jesus Christ, and he had complete access to all of this. Are there direct witnesses? So we've left one witness group, the disinterested witnesses. We're going to go into another witness group, the direct witnesses. And in fact, there were many direct witnesses who kept diaries. All of these men, on the screen there, I believe I have 15 people. Okay, all of these men, these 15, are believed to have been martyred. Some have stronger evidence of their martyrdom, some have lesser evidence of their martyrdom. Fox's Book of Martyrs is an old martyr book, would say they all were martyred, okay? Modern history says there's some weakness in some of that, but we know many of them were martyred. But we also know what Tacitus said, right? He said, exquisite tortures. So whether or not they were martyred, they were under serious threat. So all these men abandoned their lives by claiming Jesus' resurrection, all lived under threat, and many were martyred. And even under threat, these first-hand witnesses testified with their lives. Whether or not they died, they were willing, they were ready, they knew. Tacitus told us this. Testified to miracles and the resurrection. Let's meet some of them. Direct witness number 1, Matthew. Matthew wrote a diary. This is what the historical method does. We take these diaries, okay? And he wrote a diary. He was a wealthy, highly educated man, tax collector, accountant. He quit to follow JC. He was absent during the crucifixion. And in fact, there was only one of the disciples that was present during the crucifixion. It was John. Why? They were terrified. Between the Last Supper, that dinner, and the crucifixion, Jesus said, Peter's going to deny me 3 times. And in fact, he did. Why did he do that? They were terrified. Okay. Only John was there. So this guy's not there. Matthew, he wrote the book of Matthew. He was sword slain for preaching. So we're going to apply some testing now, okay? Do you think Matthew had a conflict of interest in writing this or going out and preaching? Did he have what did he have to gain? Right. So I think he had no conflict of interest. I think it was against his human interest to do this. And I say Matthew was credible. It's for you to decide how you feel. But let's read what he wrote. At dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb rolled back the stone and sat on it. This would have been Sunday. So I'm thinking to myself, there was a violent earthquake on Sunday. That might have been like an aftershock type of earthquake that you get after a large earthquake. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him. They saw him, is what he's saying. And they worshiped him. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations. Do you believe him? Maybe not. Let's keep going. Direct witness number 2, Peter had a first-hand account of Christ. He was a fisherman. He quit to follow JC. He denied Christ 3 times. He was afraid. He was absent at the crucifixion. And yet, even after all that, he ended up writing 2 New Testament books, and he was crucified upside down by choice. And it's said that when he was crucified, he was given the option to be crucified right side up. And he said, no, I don't deserve to be crucified like my Lord. Crucified me upside down. And that's the story how he ended up. Do you believe him? Is there a conflict of interest? Do you find him credible? I find that it was against his interests to do any of this. I find him credible. And what did he write? Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. And then he goes through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. He's testifying to this. Let's move to John. John is witness number 3, fisherman, quit to follow JC, only disciple at the crucifixion. Wrote 5 books of the New Testament. He was exiled to Patmos. This guy's lonely. He's lonely at Patmos, on an island in Patmos, okay? Do you think he had a conflict of interest? What did he gain? We know what Tacitus said. Exquisite tortures. We know this. I find him credible. I see no conflict of interest. And he's starting to say the same things other people are saying. So they're co-validating. Okay. Again, this is my journey. This is how I'm evaluating this, okay? And what did he say? He said, early on the first day of the week, the stone had been removed. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciples, the one that Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. That's what he writes. Skip down to verse 19. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked, interesting inclusion, for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. So what's Jesus doing in John's testimony? He's giving him the evidence. He's not saying just believe me. See, here's the evidence. I want to go back to the blue. So she came running to Simon Peter and other disciples, the one that Jesus loved. Do you know who the one who Jesus loved was? It's John. He's writing about himself. Now, if you think John is saying, I'm the one that Jesus loved, if that's what you think, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, my name doesn't matter anymore. I shed my identity. What matters is Jesus loves me. That's transformative, right? Let's move on. Then there's this guy, Thomas. We know him as Doubting Thomas. The pejorative, Doubting Thomas. He's a fisherman and a builder. He quit to follow JC, also absent during the crucifixion. Thomas went further than any of the apostles. He evangelized India. And if you go to India today, you'll see churches that are all St. Thomas churches. Why? That's what the history is. The oral history, they'll tell you he's the one who came here. Thomas was beheaded. Do you think he had a conflict of interest? I don't think he had a conflict of interest. I find him credible. I think it was against his interests. John writes about Thomas. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came in and said, peace be with you. Okay. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. A week later, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. What's in his side? That's where he was speared. Okay. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, and I can only imagine the depth of this, right? My Lord and my God. And what did he do? He evangelized India, as I described. And then Jesus said, this is fun to read, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. What's that? That's the belief equation. That's the belief equation, right? Because you have seen me, you have believed. Compartment knowledge. Blessed are those who have not seen me. They don't have the knowledge, and yet they believe. That's faith. That's what again, the belief equation is at least 2,000 years old. I've just plagiarized it. Again, even under threat, these first-hand witnesses testified with their lives. But there's more. There is a hostile witness. This is Paul, originally known as Saul of Tarsus. He was a Roman citizen, highly educated under Gamaliel. This is like the MIT of the day, okay? He was arresting early Christians. That was what he did. One day, while holding a number of arrest warrants on his way to arrest Christians in Damascus, he says, he met Jesus Christ after the resurrection. He met him. That's what he's saying. And he spent the rest of his life preaching. He didn't get married. He didn't have children. He said, there's no time for that. All I need to do, none of that matters. All that matters is I need to preach. That's all I need to do. Paul was beheaded. He met Jesus at the age of 30. He is presumed to have been killed at around the age of 64 or around the age of 65. Do you think he had a conflict of interest? No. He had no conflict of interest that I can see. This is totally against his interests. In fact, this makes no sense. He's Jimmy's mom. Okay. And what did he say? That Christ died, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas. Cephas is Peter. That he appeared to Cephas, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and the sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep, meaning died. Then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. What does he mean by abnormally born? He explains it in the next sentence. He says, "For I am the least of the apostles, and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God." He's saying, I'm a hostile witness. That's what he's saying. And then what did he do? He went on 3 vast journeys. And this is the first journey. He's all over the Mediterranean area. Second journey, he does some interesting things. At the bottom it says he met Timothy. He met Timothy in Lystra. Timothy became his kind of adopted son. He loved Timothy. Everyone understood this, okay? And that's described by Luke in Acts 16. And then moving along his journey, he gets to Philippi. What happens in Philippi? He's imprisoned, according to Luke. And in fact, you can go to Philippi today, and you can see that sign, which is the prison of Paul today. His third journey, he's all over the place again. And then there's this fourth journey, but it's not a missionary journey. It starts in Caesarea by the sea. Okay, it's right by the sea. And where he's at, it's described in the book of Acts. He's at Herod's palace. And he's arrested, and he's sailed to Rome. And Paul is beheaded in Rome. But while he was in Rome, he wrote a little bit. He wrote the book of 2 Timothy. And he wrote in Timothy this. Who's he writing to? Timothy, his adopted son. This is who he's writing to, okay? They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, Timothy, keep your head in all situations. Endure hardship. That's what he's telling him. Do the work of an evangelist. Discharge all the duties of your ministry. Then he says a goodbye, basically is what it's saying here. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, meaning my blood is spilled. And the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Do your best to come to me quickly. He just wants to say goodbye to Timothy. Only Luke is with me. I have to tell you, when I read that, it just jumps off the page to me. This is the man's diary, and he's saying goodbye and telling his son, I have 4 kids. He's telling his son, please just come see me and come quickly. Who's this guy, Luke? So Luke is not a direct witness of Jesus Christ. He's a first-hand historian post-Christ. He's writing biographies of all that's happening afterwards. That's the book of Acts. And Acts actually is a historical book of the Bible. It's just history, just being kept by Luke. Luke's a physician. He's the most educated New Testament writer. He quit to follow Jesus Christ, following Paul. He's the biographer of Paul. He wrote 2 New Testament books, Luke and Acts, and he is hanged. Do you think he had a conflict of interest? See, I don't think so. I think this guy had every reason not to do this, and he did it anyways, against his human interests. I find Luke very credible. And Luke, actually, his facts line right up. This is Acts 3. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod was tetrarch, Philip was tetrarch, Lysanias was tetrarch. Oh, just fact find that. Who were the tetrarchs under Pontius Pilate? Herod, Philip, and Lysanias. It all lines up. Okay? This is, again, we're co-validating these diaries. Is there physical evidence? Earlier, we looked at this slide, and I'm just going to highlight the bottom. Archaeological corroboration. Through historical methods, experts frequently discuss how the discovery of physical ruin helped validate or contextualize ancient myths. Just looking at the book of Acts, and this is just a handful of them, but there are many, you see ruins today, right? Top left, you've got the Jerusalem temple. That's Acts 21. That's the Temple of the Mount. That's currently a mosque. But at the time, that was the Jewish Jerusalem temple. And now it's just the Temple Mount. The temple is actually gone. And then you've got the Ephesus Theater. That's still there today. This is where Paul was attacked and is described in Acts. You've got Greece, you've got Corinth, Galatia, Herod's palace. We looked at Herod's palace. This is where Paul was imprisoned before he was sent to Rome to be beheaded, and it's described in Acts. Philippi today is in enormous ruins, and I showed you already one area where it's described through oral knowledge. This was the area of Paul's imprisonment. That's what they're saying today, and this is valid to historians today. And then there's this, the prison of Christ, supposedly, allegedly. In Jerusalem, this was where Christ was kept prior to his crucifixion. Maybe. But historians give that some credibility. Is there historical science? Yes. This gets really interesting. What is historical science? How does historical science evaluate artifacts? Historical science does contextual analysis, scientific dating, material examination, and comparative research. Traces technological evolution. I want you to keep an eye on that one. Traces technological evolution. What was the technology of the day, and what does it tell us today? So, is there historical science? Yes. In 1355, the Shroud of Turin appears. It's belonging to a French knight who declares he has Jesus' shroud. His name is Geoffrey de Charny. This is a book worth reading, the forensic summary of the evidence of the Shroud of Turin. The shroud is shown on the screen. That's what Geoffrey knew. Geoffrey just said, this is the Shroud of Turin. He's not making any big, he didn't say the Shroud of Turin. He said, this is Jesus' burial shroud. This is what he said. He doesn't know anything other than this cloth. He's just making a claim of a linen. That's all he's saying, okay? 1355, fast forward to 1898, okay? Over 500 years later. And the first photo of Geoffrey de Charny's linen is taken. Photography was brand new. It's 1835. Geoffrey de Charny knows nothing about photography. He knows nothing about exposures. He knows nothing about photonegatives. Nothing, okay? That's the technology point, the technology part. How did the technology evolve? And what we found is that Secondo Pia was the photographer. He takes a picture of this, and he didn't have an iPhone where you can just see the picture right away. He did what we used to do. We used to go into a dark lab, and you would actually process an acetate. And when he looked at the acetate in the dark room, he saw a positive. He saw positive. Usually the positive's on the picture, not on the negative. He's seeing a positive on the negative. What does it mean? It meant to him that there is a negative on the linen. So when he took a picture of the linen and saw the negative of the linen, it became positive because two negatives make a positive. Okay. So the shroud already had a negative imprint on it. And then I note here, negative exposure technology did not exist in 1355. It's a 500-year later technology, and that was where the historical science starts to come into play in terms of evaluating technology. Now, if you look carefully at that, you start to make out a body. And what you actually start to make out is this. Look at the bottom image. Look at the top image. This is the position of this body, okay? In your bottom left, you're seeing the man facing upright. In your bottom right, you're seeing his back, okay? And this is the position of how the linen was sort of sandwiched over him, okay? Is there any body shroud that has a negative image other than the Shroud of Turin? No other recognized body shroud bears a negative image like the Shroud of Turin. Huh. So this is officially, this guy took the world's first selfie. That sounds funny, but I'm actually going to get back to that. I think there's something more there, intentional, maybe. Let's ask some questions. How many watts imprinted the Shroud of Turin and at what angle? Several studies estimate the image would take roughly 34 trillion watts of power. But more recent 5-year experiments by ENEA calculated that a burst of 6 to 8 billion watts of VUV, which is vacuum ultraviolet light, would be enough. Oh, it's not 34 trillion. It's just 6 to 8 billion. Okay. The duration for this radiation to leave an imprint without destroying the cloth would have had to have been less than 1/140 of a second. That's the duration. Okay. Analysis using 3D image analyzers such as the NASA-derived VP8 indicates that the radiation projected perpendicular to the cloth from the body's surface. What's this mean? It means it came out of the body and hit the cloth perpendicular all the way around. That's why you see his back on the back. That's why you see his front on the front. That's why the top of the head, bottom of the feet. That's what you're looking at, okay? There must be some explanation, right? How does 6 to 8 billion watts of power compare to modern-day energy demands? 6 to 8 billion watts, which is 6 gigawatts to 8 gigawatts of power. Put in perspective, on a typical day, New York City consumes roughly 5.5 to 6 gigawatts. Lightning strikes. 6 to 8 billion watts is like a continuous, sustained barrage of multiple lightning strikes. Explain this. I talked to you about NASA's VP8 image analyzer. The analyzer takes this two-dimensional cloth and is able to create a three-dimensional image out of it, and here's what they found. Here's what they came up with. They found that this person was severely flogged. Okay, this person had the same nails, the same spears, the same holes on their head as the story of Jesus. This is the position of the person in the cloth, the bent knee, which is consistent with crucifixion, and the feet, which are consistent with crucifixion. Now, if you think I'm just making all this up, I want you to know this is a whole science. It's called syndology, the study of the Shroud of Turin, syndology. The most studied artifact in human history, in fact, is the Shroud of Turin. In 1978, STURP, which is the Shroud of Turin research project, came up with a summary of its tests. There were 33 researchers. Megawatt energy from inside the body. No known method to produce this image. Not paint, not dye, not art. Medically and physiologically accurate. Botanically accurate, meaning the pollen that's in the linen. Botanically accurate to Jesus' crucifixion, place and month. Hundreds of Roman flagrum, dumbbell marks. Puncture blood flows on the forehead and the scalp. Punctures on the wrist and feet and side match Jesus' crucifixion. Blood preceded, this is interesting, blood preceded the energy exposure. What's that mean? This is what they said. It means that this guy got wrapped up, the blood infiltrated the linen, and then the energy exposure happened. That's what they're saying. In 2015, optochemical dating placed the age of this linen at somewhere between 15 BC and 150 AD with a 95% confidence. Let's just gather the knowledge we have so far. Historians corroborate witness timelines, witness threats, and witness behaviors. There are multiple direct witnesses. There's a hostile witness. There's no conflict of interest, in my opinion. You can have a different opinion. I think it's just the opposite. There are physical ruins that increasingly match the story because we keep finding more. There's historical science that evidence a supernatural phenomenon. There are early records that eliminates the legend theory. So here's my verdict. I believe the witnesses all told the truth to the best of their knowledge. That's what I believe. But I'm a skeptic, okay? How can we know they were not all wrong about what they think they saw? It's a problem. And that's where my faith step comes in. My one faith step. I believe they were not all co-hallucinating. You have to make a decision on that yourself. Do you think they were all co-hallucinating? If you think that they were co-hallucinating, then you're going to decide one way. I don't think so. I think all the evidence taken together is that they weren't. So here's my belief, based on knowledge. Modern courtroom fact-finding, and one faith step, that they were not co-hallucinating. And that's why, if you ask me, do you believe in Christ? I'm going to say, and it's actually not a big statement, his history is compelling, and going back to my thesis, there is no religion as historically supported as Christianity. This courtroom fact-finding concept is not mine. It's how things are done. In fact, here's a book that says, and they're worth reading, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. That's a courtroom concept. The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's a courtroom concept. And so you're left with a question. What's your credibility verdict? Keeping in mind, you can't prove anything with history. You just have to be satisfied. Do you think my thesis is accurate? There is no religion as historically supported as Christianity. I hope you think so, because I think that's really my conviction. So here's what we've done in 2 talks. Talk 1, I believe I proved, not evidence level, I proved through science that God exists, answering the question, does God exist? Today, I think, and if you think the same way, I believe I provided sufficient evidence that Jesus Christ is God. Answering the question, if so, who is God? And there is a last question. And the last question is, for all of us who have gotten through check 1 and check 2, how does this affect my life? And I can tell you personally, it's changed my life, changed everything I do every day, every single day. It changed. These 2 questions changed my life. And with that, thanks for listening.
Do you need the iPad? Do you need the iPad or no?
I'll take it. Yep.
Okay. I know we all just thanked Dr. Rizkallah, but can we thank Dr. Rizkallah one more time? Yeah, go ahead. If you haven't already, we're going to end right around 9 o'clock, which is about 25 minutes from now. As best as I can tell from our QR code, there's been about 10 questions that have been submitted, so there is still time. I'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Dr. Rizkallah, I will start with question number 1, is, do you ever doubt? Do you ever doubt your belief in Jesus Christ? And maybe if you could give us, you grew up in a Christian home from what I understand, but when did your conviction that Jesus is exactly who he said he is, when did that become conviction?
So for me, the Jesus question wasn't even on my mind as a child. The Jesus question didn't really take root until I was in really late college. Because I started, and I would encourage anybody to start with the science. I don't know how anyone even gets to the question of who is God without establishing, does God exist? So I started really in high school biology, starting to see God in all the science, and then I pursued a science pathway, and I found God. And then I went to that secondary question. But to get to the heart of the original question, do I doubt? So I want to go back to that pyramid we talked about, right? The levels of proof pyramid. The question of do I doubt is actually, it's actually the wrong question, okay? Because doubt is built into anything historical. That's a fact, okay? That's how we fact find. What was the highest tier of the proof levels? It was beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard, right? Can you get to proof? You cannot, okay? So, and I think there's something meaningful really in staying on that question a little bit more. I think that there is some level of embarrassment or self-insulting where a person feels like, I am doubting. I feel like I am doubting. There's something wrong with me. Actually, I don't think that that's good. And if you feel that way, you should stop, okay? Because actually, if you read the words of Jesus Christ himself, what's the guy saying? The guy is saying, blessed are those who believe and have not seen, right? He's saying those people are special. The ones who have seen, oh man, they are lucky ones. Okay, why is he? And he says this. I quoted multiple things. Do you remember earlier where I said this guy did a selfie? There's something about that I feel like is evidence for us today. You see, 2,000 years ago, at least people got to see him, right? I don't get to see the guy, or do I? Like, is it possible that this guy that keeps talking about evidence throughout all of his words gave it to us in our modern technology because he knew we were going to look at it? There's something about that I actually find compelling. So do I doubt? I think doubt is built into everything, but what I don't doubt is my process. I use scientific method, I use historical method, and I'm methodic about it. So every time I am thinking about something or reprocessing something, I start at the same point, reevaluate all my steps to check that I didn't miss anything. I get to the same point. Do I doubt? I don't doubt my methodology. I think my methodology is sound.
That's helpful. This is Tim Keller, who, when he was talking about doubt, he gave two different categories. And one of the things that I would share on top of that is doubting is part of the journey, but it's never the destination, meaning we're never intended just to live in a constant state of just doubt. But the two categories that Tim Keller gave, and he talks about this in his book, The Reason for God, or The Reason of God. He said there are those who are doubting, but they're doubting to disbelieve. That no matter what evidence you present to them, they will always disbelieve because they're doubting to always prove someone or something wrong. And then there are categories of the person who is doubting to believe. It's the father who Jesus confronted with the question, do you believe I can do this? And he said, I do, but can you help me in my unbelief? And so I think, Mo, you are in the second category of doubting to believe. And science, the Lord used science to help you, and the Lord used history, and not just you, but all of us. So it is important. Doubt, it leads to really great questions, but it's never the destination to live there. And so I see that your questions led you to investigate. Investigate led to find evidence, and evidence brought conviction, and conviction just changed your life, and consequently a lot of people. This isn't a question that came in. This is a question I actually wrote down. I'll get to some of those questions. But this was maybe 30 years ago when I was in seminary. It was maybe first, second semester, one of the professors in our Gospels class. First day, never forget it because it rocked me to the core. His question was, why do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each tell the resurrection story differently? and why or how, and does that difference undermine or actually strengthen the case that the resurrection really happened? And I'll be very honest with you, 30 years ago when he asked me that question in the entire class, we all sat there, blank expression on our face, and I was like, wait, the Gospels have a different account of the resurrection? Because I remember clearly the Apostle Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 15, if the resurrection didn't happen, then your faith is useless. So the resurrection, everything hinges on the resurrection. So why do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each tell the resurrection story a little bit differently? And if we go in order, we're most likely looking at Mark was the first gospel, followed by Matthew, Luke, and John years later.
Yeah, so historians talk about this, and they actually describe certain inconsistencies in these gospels, not as defects. They actually describe them as features. If they were identical, historians would perceive them as coordinated. Okay? The fact that they are on the big topics consistent and on the little topics a little bit different, it actually is very reasonable and expected that there would be some differences in a person's best account. And that's in fact what historians find, that they actually are more valid because they do not appear to be coordinated.
Yeah. What Dr. Rizkallah said there is all of the main stuff. The tomb was empty. Jesus died. There was evidence that he appeared not just to one, but to multiple people, and evidence of lives were changed. I think an example for that in our modern day 21st century, if Dr. Rizkallah and I and Kyla and Caden witnessed a car accident, and we were giving a report to the police officer of exactly what happened and what we saw, and we all gave word for word a detail of what we saw in the car accident, the police would say, we're not even listening to that. You guys got together and figured out what story you wanted to tell, and all of it's invalidated. And so I just think the fact that the resurrection, the different gospel accounts adds to the strengthening of their story, not necessarily taking away from it.
Totally.
Okay. You can't disagree, so yeah. How can we be sure Jesus actually died? There's plenty of stories that...
I like this question. So what's interesting is this question actually underscores the strength of the resurrection, okay? The historical evidence post-Christ for a historian is actually substantial, to the point that you have to say, well, then maybe he just didn't die, okay? But here's the thing. Romans know how to kill people, okay? And they're known for knowing how to kill people. But the story here is not just a matter of a guy who may not have died, okay? They nailed a nail, according to the story, through his tarsals of his feet, okay? Through his tarsals. Now, if you've ever met anybody who's ever had a fracture of one of those 7 tarsals, they can't walk. Okay, so we're not talking about a guy who just didn't die. The man is walking around, and he's not walking around like this. That's not what they're saying. No, he's just walking, okay? So the question isn't even, how do we know Jesus didn't die? The question would have to be a more compound question. Like, how's this guy walking around even if he didn't die, right? So the question really becomes, in my opinion, a non-starter.
Go back to the shroud. You finished your talk with that. Does the carbon dating match up with the Shroud of Turin and all of the study that's gone into it?
That's great. So actually I had a note, and I don't think I said it, I had a note in the slide. In 1988, I believe it was, there was carbon dating testing of the shroud that did not put it in Jesus' time.
Dr. Rizkallah, maybe give us, for those, myself included, what is carbon dating and how do we actually, because it's also used in science and it's thrown around a ton of, oh, the carbon dating doesn't support that. But
Sure.
give us a high-level explanation of carbon dating and then go.
So carbon is typically found in nature as carbon-12, okay? There's a certain percentage of carbon in the atmosphere that is an isotope of carbon that is affected by ultraviolet rays, creating an isotope of carbon at a very small percentage called carbon-14. Animals breathe in carbon-14, they eat plants that have breathed in carbon-14, and so it becomes part of our bones. Plants take in carbon-14, they breathe it in. When you make a linen out of plants, it should have a certain ratio of carbon-14 in it, and carbon-14 has a half-life. And as that carbon-14 degrades, you'd expect less carbon-14 in the linen. So you can date an object up to 50,000 years using carbon dating and check its ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 and figure out, as long as there are no impurities, you can figure out generally what the date range is of it with a certain level of confidence. Now, back to the question. In 1988, there was carbon dating done of the Shroud of Turin. The carbon dating put it into around 1300 AD, about the time of the Night, okay? Since then, they've come to realize that the Shroud of Turin has had a lot of handling and a lot of impurities, and in fact, there were bacteria and even fungus growing in it, which would have had later dating, okay? So because the carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin was determined to be not reliable, they used different types of testing. I only mentioned one, but there were different types of testing, and the one that I did mention, which basically overrode the carbon dating, put it at 95% optochemical testing in that date range.
Martyrdom. You mentioned in your talk that from what we know and history tells us, tradition also, that from what we know, most of the disciples, if not all of them, were martyred for their faith. They were brutally killed. Other religions die for their beliefs. So what makes the disciples' martyrdom different than anyone who would die for Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam? There was a question that was, is there an explanation of why John survived persecution while the other disciples died? I'll answer that first part, and then you answer the second part. They tried to kill John in 95 AD by boiling him in hot oil. He survived, and they believed. Tertullius talks about this later on as a historian, that he was unkillable. And so they left him alone, and he died supposedly of natural causes 5 years later. So they tried to murder him. It just didn't work. How does their martyrdom speak differently than anyone else who would be martyred? David Koresh in the 80s and 90s, lots of people died for him. So what makes their martyrdom so different?
So I don't think it's the martyrdom that's alone that's what's critical. It's actually why. What was their claim? What was their why? Okay, so if you go one by one on for these different martyrs, okay, why did certain people run into the Twin Towers on 9/11? Why? That's a form of martyrdom. Why? What's their why? Okay, if you ask them their why, what would they say? You can already surmise their answers, okay? Hatred, that's a why. Or in Islam, if you are martyred, you may or may not know this, you get 72 virgins in paradise. That's a why, okay? When you go to the why of even a person who goes to war, our amazing military, what's their why? Well, they believe in freedom. That's their why. That's why. What was the why of these disciples? See, they're not the same. They're a different why. Their why wasn't because I don't care about living. No, they were afraid. They told you this. They were running. But something happened, and it was transformative. And after they ran and they met this guy, this transformation became their why. Nothing matters. Nothing matters. And we have no self-interest in this, but we are not going to stop. We feel we are called to do this. So what's the difference? It's their why.
Much of your cooperation is with the Bible, and this is going to get into the question of, to someone who doesn't necessarily believe in the Bible, you telling stories about the Bible doesn't necessarily help anything. So the question is, I think what I'm getting at is there any skepticism or concern that the Bible that we have today has been tampered with by the many authorities that may have had incentive to alter it?
So at some point, that's great. So at some point, you have to ask that of every bit of history, okay? There's no proof, okay? And so you have to decide whether or not you, as an individual sitting in a chair, are satisfied. I've made that decision. You're going to have to make that decision. And if you're going to hold a standard of proof that's proof level, then you can't believe anything in history. Nothing. Just be clear on that. And you have to be consistent about it, okay? If you're going to be true to yourself, right, you have to be consistent about it. Historical method, we looked at it, okay? Diaries matter. These guys have diaries. They have no conflict of interest. I don't look at this as taking information out of the Bible. I look at the Bible as an aggregation of diaries in the New Testament. It's an aggregation, okay? They put it in one place. By putting it in one place didn't invalidate it, right? So I am actually evaluating it as diaries in the same way the historical method would evaluate it. If you're going to ask the question, could it have been tampered with? Sure, it could have been tampered with. But again, when you start cross-referencing all of these things and you start to use historical method, they start to co-validate. So I think that even on the tampering level, you're still left with a consistency that gets you to the transformation that on the big items, they're the same.
So maybe a couple of questions came in about the scripture. How do we know who wrote the books of the Bible? And some other questions about the scripture. Maybe you could speak a little bit more to how we actually have the scriptures. You're talking about one piece of literature, 66 books, 40 different authors, over 1,500 years, 3 continents, 3 different languages, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, all telling one storyline throughout. It wouldn't be possible. So maybe give some background on how we understand the scriptures, how we receive the scriptures, and ultimately, how do we know who wrote the books of the Bible?
Well, that's very loaded.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I tried.
That's very loaded. I'm going to stay out of the Old Testament because I don't think that's relevant for what we're really talking about today. I'm not sure that I can spend I could spend hours talking about this, so I'm not sure really how to capture that. I think you're better off giving a synopsis on this.
Maybe I'll rephrase.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to hear me. They want to hear from you. Why do you have so much confidence in the scriptures?
I think we went to it earlier, right? We're saying that the scriptures are actually are consistent with what we're seeing in the historical record. We're seeing that I don't even call them scriptures, okay? I actually find that if you use those words, you're stopping historical method, okay? These are diaries of people. When Paul writes to the Corinthians, he's writing what? Letters. I don't like the word scriptures. It creates too much romance in the conversation. This is not a romance novel, okay? This is a letter, okay? And when he's writing to Timothy, saying goodbye, It's a letter. So I find this, as I read it, I find it to be consistent, and I find it to be reasonable and satisfying. Okay? And again, I think that's important, that everyone has to make a decision as to not proof level. You have to figure out what your level of proof is, and at the end of the day, I really think this is an important statement. You individually have to be satisfied or not. And once you're satisfied, you say, I'm satisfied with the evidence. It's enough for me.
A couple questions came in on Islam. At least if you look at the current population, roughly 8 billion people, it's like 3.5 to 4 billion people identify as Christian. And the different iterations, Catholic, Protestant, things like that. There's roughly 1.5 billion to 2 billion people who identify as Islam. So why do so many people believe in Islam if it's so easy to defeat in terms of the evidence?
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question. How many people do you know of that converted to Islam? I don't know any. Personally, you may know some, but I don't know any. Why? You don't convert to Islam. I'm from Egypt. It's a Muslim country. People don't convert to Islam, certainly not by choice. At some point, Islam invaded Egypt. Egypt was a Christian country, and Islam invaded it, and you could only keep your Christian religion if you paid the Giza. Giza was a tax, okay? But how many people convert to Islam? And yet you've got 1.8 billion, I believe is the number, people who identify as Muslim. Why? They're born into it. That's why. And in fact, Islam uses reproduction as a tool and try to get out of it. There's a wonderful book by Nabil Qureshi. It's worth a read. It says, it's called Looking for Allah and Finding Jesus, or something like that. Seeking Allah, thank you. Seeking Allah and Finding Jesus. And he describes how he actually left Islam. He went into Christianity and how it affected his family. He lost his family, right? And this is typical in the Muslim religion. And I'm not knocking anybody in the Muslim religion. I have to tell you, in my heart of hearts, I see Muslim people as stolen Christians. That's how I feel, because they believe in Jesus Christ. They believe in Moses. That's really how I see it. And I will tell you, I believe in the next 100 or so years, as more people who are Muslim are exposed to the Jesus story, they will exit Islam and move into Christianity. Trying to think of the name of the guy. There's a man who teaches so much on Islam. His name is David Wood. Thank you for that. David Wood. If you haven't listened to David Wood actually evangelized Nabil Qureshi. He exposed Nabil Qureshi to the lies in Islam and how the Muslim religion stole really the story of the Jesus story. So anybody who knows the Muslim, who is sort of seeking Allah and Finding Jesus process, have them read that book. And if you want to learn more about it, I encourage you to study more about what David Wood has to say. But at the end of the day, all the people who are believing Islam are believing group 2. The story of one guy who said, I heard this. And did he do any miracles? Ask him. Ask that guy. In the Quran, multiple times, he will do no miracles. Yeah. So why do they believe him? Well, they're not believing him on knowledge, I can tell you that, because there's no evidence. They're believing him completely on faith in one guy's mind.
This is neither here nor there, but when I met Dr. Rizkallah's dad 20 years ago. His dad passed about 3 years ago.
2 years ago.
When I met Dr. Rizkallah's father, who grew up in Egypt, which is a persecuted country to be a Christian, he shook my hand, and I saw a little cross on his wrist. And I said, "What's that?" And he's got darker skin, and you can barely, it's very, very faint. And he explained to me that growing up in Egypt, it's not safe to talk about Jesus publicly without facing some semblance of persecution. And that was 20 years ago, give or take. And I think it was, I'm tired right now, so I'm sorry for these tears. But my entire family got that cross tattooed on our wrist, not just to honor Mo's dad, Dr. Rizkallah's dad, but every time I meet someone, I make sure to shake their hand with my wrist pointed up as a way, what is that on your wrist? And I not only have the opportunity to tell them about faith in Christ, but I have the opportunity to tell them about the story of Dr. Rizkallah's father, who inspired all of us, at least in my family, to get that. So that's neither here nor there, but your father, who lived in a persecuted context, had a profound impact on a guy who lives in Woburn. So thanks for that. When it comes to world religions, Dr. Rizkallah mentioned that Christianity is the big one, Islam is a big one, Hinduism is a big one, Buddhism is a big one, and there's obviously multiple smaller religions within that. But if you're ever having a conversation with someone about what really, at the end of the day, sets apart Christianity from all of these other world religions, whatever they are, and I'm not getting into necessarily evidence which Dr. Rizkallah showed us tonight in a very profound, compelling way. But a primary difference is the difference of works versus grace. Every other world religion, it does not matter what the religion is, it is a works-based religion. If you do this, you hope to get this, whether it's how many virgins in
72.
72. In Hinduism and any other world religion. But the only difference that sets apart Christianity from all of them, and the evidence is on Christianity's side, is it is not a works-based religion. It is a grace-based, not something we did, but something God did. Dr. Rizkallah, I want to finish with the last question. And there was multiple questions that came in on this. You did not incorporate personal knowledge, such as experiences and feelings, into your belief equation. Clearly, some of us are more emotional than others. So it's not that you're disqualifying or discounting emotions and feelings. But the question is, you didn't incorporate personal knowledge in your belief equation. So let's just finish with, how does your belief equation, you talked about science, you talked about history, and you finished with it's changed your life. So how does that factor in your emotions and your feelings and all of that into who you are and how you walk with God today?
So I will say that I didn't mention personal knowledge, but it's actually in the belief equation. It's in knowledge, okay? I didn't mention it. For various reasons, I'm trying to provide evidence, and I can't provide evidence if I'm talking about personal knowledge, right? Personal knowledge, what is it? It's the first time you kiss your spouse, okay? Was anyone else in the room? Maybe not. Maybe it's just you and your spouse. That's personal knowledge. You can't prove that unless somebody watched you. And even if they did watch you, they don't know how you felt. That's personal knowledge. And if they were trying to detail how you felt, they would say something like, scientifically, 2 lips approached and made contact, exchanging saliva and bacteria, right? That's a
Let's not ruin everyone's first kiss
scientific
here.
way. But can they describe how you felt? Right? Can they describe sorrow, love, all these different emotions, right? No, that's personal knowledge, right? Now, how does that relate to me in that third question, okay? I'm very left brain. That's how I work, okay? The right brain people, they're the violinists, the guitar players, the artists. They're the right brain people. They're the imaginative people. What's interesting, though, to me as a scientist is we've got these two lobes of our brain, right and left. I use mostly my left, I feel. And I think I do need to work more on my right because there's half of it that I'm not using enough. And I actually think we should be thinking about this and saying, I need to be exploring more deeply than just analytics. I need to be feeling and thinking and experiencing, and perhaps there is, in fact, more to it than the analytics. And in fact, there is. In my opinion, my finding is that my spiritual life doesn't live in my left brain. It lives in my right brain, if I can put it that way. And I think we do need to let go and get out of our left brain and just kind of start to say, God, you gave me a right brain. I'm ready to use it. I'm ready to feel this. I'm ready to experience this. I'm ready to go into a personal place that I can't explain with my left brain. So that's where I'm at.
We started conversation one with scientific evidence. The question was, do you want proof of God? Scientific evidence gives us an answer that there is a creator, there is a designer, but it didn't get us to Jesus. The historical evidence is very compelling in Jesus. He is who he said he is, what he claimed to be, So I wanted you to finish with an encouragement to us. We've been presented with evidence. What does a person who is convinced, not just of the scientific evidence and the historical evidence, what is your encouragement? What do we do now? What's next? And to someone, I want you to answer it in two ways. To someone who's convinced, what does a convinced person look like? Not just on emotions and feelings, but I've considered the evidence and I'm convinced. What do I do? And to the person who's like, but I still feel stuck. Dr. Rizkallah, I've heard your science. Dr. Rizkallah, I've heard the history, but I feel stuck. What's your encouragement to that person?
So I love how John did it. I think it's a lesson for all of us. He was the one that Jesus loved. He went through the process, and where is he at? He's the one that Jesus loved. And honestly, I wake up every morning, I sit on the side of my bed, and I say, good morning, Lord, every morning. And I'm just talking to him. Now you might find that strange, but I'm getting right brain, okay? and how'd I get there? There is a God. Science screams it. It appears to be Jesus Christ. And honestly, that guy makes sense to me. Amen. So then I'm left with this sense of identity, like John. I shed the old identity. Who is Mouhab Rizkallah? It doesn't matter. My identity doesn't matter. Like John said, the one who Jesus loves. And then what does that do? Once you have that identity, you're belonging. Okay, that tethers me to something. And then you go to a next level, which is purpose. We talked about that a little bit last time, right? Purpose. So I sit at the edge of my bed and I say, good morning, Lord. What do you want me to do today? Right. Now that may strike you as crazy, but I have to tell you, I am so liberated by my identity and belonging and purpose that starts every day sitting on the side of my bed. And if you don't do this, I encourage you, sit up on the side of your bed before you get up. And shame on you if you get off the bed before you do it. That's how I feel. Okay. I don't even want to get out of bed before I've identified where my mind is, okay, just centering my mind. I think that's rational after you've seen the science and the history.
To the person who has considered the evidence, but they just feel stuck, what's your encouragement to them? What's the next step?
Can I be honest with you? I don't know how you could be stuck. I don't know. I think every person is really in an individual place. Some of it is, some people have relationship dilemmas that are consuming their mind, and financial dilemmas that are consuming their mind. I can't speak to the uniqueness of in any one person's life. What I can say is, if you're using all of your left brain and all of your right brain, you should be entering into a place of hope. Because I actually think hope is the antidote to all depression, to all stuckness. Mm-hmm. And if you don't feel, after you have a sense of belonging and a sense of identity, that you have hope, I suggest you talk to your minister.
I really appreciate Dr. Rizkallah's response to those two questions, and I realize for everyone here, Genesis might not be your home church. You might have a different church. You might not have a church community. But what Mo described, Dr. Rizkallah described as he's sitting on the edge of his bed every morning, is what we're trying to do as a church. We're just trying to help people walk with God. We believe God created us, and we believe God created us to know Him, to experience Him, to enjoy Him, to encounter Him every moment of every day. But we also believe as a church that we walked away from God, willingly rebelled, sinned against God, but we believe God entered into time and space, into His own creation to make a way for His loved ones to walk with Him today, tomorrow, and throughout eternity. As a church, we're all in on that. That's what we're trying to do, is help people experience what God created us for, which is friendship with Him. And I would add to what Dr. Rizkallah shared. If you are in a place of stuckness, I would invite you to get in community. It's hard to be stuck in community. You need some people in your life who will love you, who will serve you, who will challenge you, who will encourage you. Ask questions, but don't ask questions in isolation. It's easy to read books by yourself. It's easy to listen to podcasts by yourself. It's easy to listen to anything by yourself. That is not going to talk back to you, but community will. I'm thankful for my relationship with Dr. Rizkallah because he challenges me. He asks me questions. I don't even know what he's asking me half the time, but I'm thankful that I get challenged by his questions. So if you are stuck, make a decision to get engaged in community. It doesn't have to be this one, but it's got to be a community of men and women that will love you and serve you and allow you to ask your questions so you don't live in a place of stuckness. You can live in a place of walking with God the way Dr. Rizkallah described it. What a beautiful way to start your morning. Amen. God, you're good, I'm here, let's go for another day. What do you have? Can we thank Dr. Rizkallah for his time? Thank you, friend. I know it's about 9:15. Apologize for going a little bit late, but I hope it was worth it and you were encouraged. If you have any questions and just want to talk with Dr. Rizkallah about some of the questions that you have, he's going to stick around at the very front of the stage. Would love to serve you that way. Other than that, thanks for being with us for conversation number 2. Get on our email list so you can learn about other conversations upcoming this fall. Love you guys. Have a great rest of your night. God bless. Peace out.